Hi guys, it is that time again. Welcome to my November reading wrap up. Today I'm going to be telling you all about the 8 books that I read last month. As always, I'll give a spoiler-free synopsis and then tell you my general thoughts and what I rated each of these books. So the first book I read in November was It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. Finally, I feel like I was the only person who didn't read this right when it came out, and that was because it was right around Halloween time and I was trying to get all my spooky season books read. And then I started hearing some not so great reviews of this book, so it kind of turned me off from wanting to pick it up right away, but I really did want to form my own opinion, and after reading it I feel like I can see why people like this book as well as why people were disappointed by it. For those that don't know, this is the sequel to Colleen Hoover's probably most popular book, It Ends With Us, which I read for the first time this year and loved it. I gave that book 5 stars. It's one of my favorite books that I read this year. So when I heard that she was writing a sequel that was going to be mostly from Atlas's point of view, I was so excited and highly anticipating this book because Atlas was my favorite character in that book. So this book picks up right where It Ends With Us ended, and it personally really worked for me. I feel like it delivered exactly what it promised it would deliver. Even if I was hoping for a little bit more, I feel like it was right on par with what Colleen set out to achieve when writing this book, which was giving us Atlas's perspective and giving us a happy ending for Lily and Atlas. My only critique with this book, and the reason I can see why people were disappointed in it, is that to me it read more like a really long epilogue as opposed to a sequel or its own novel. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. This book did have its own story and its own plot line, but it was just kind of a continuation of Lily and Atlas's story, which again was what I was expecting, but it felt like a really long epilogue. But I did enjoy it. I liked it. I love Atlas, and I feel like this book is for the Atlas girlies. And then I dove right into some more Colleen Hoover and I read November 9th. I filmed a whole reading vlog reading this on November 9th, so if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts, you should definitely check out that vlog. I had so much fun filming it. But this book is about Ben and Fallon, and they meet one day on November 9th and they have an instant spark and connection, but Fallon is moving to New York City that night, so she's not really looking to start up a relationship or anything. So Ben and Fallon come to this agreement that they're going to meet up once a year, every year on November 9th, and that's the only day they're going to talk to each other. They don't exchange phone numbers, they even block each other on social media, which for that part of the story you really do have to suspend your disbelief. But other than that, I thought it was such a cool concept. So when I started reading the book, I honestly was not feeling it at all. I didn't like Ben as a character, and it was my least favorite trope, insta-love, but the more I was reading, the more I was just loving the story, loving the plot. I was so intrigued to know what was going to happen. I feel like Colleen Hoover is so good at telling a story and at building up suspense to this crazy plot twist, and once I got towards the end of the book and more into the story, I feel like all my questions were answered and I understood why the characters were the way they were and why the things that weirded me out at first were happening. So I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I just absolutely loved it. I didn't care for the characters a ton, but the plot and the storyline and the concept just really made up for it, and I had a really great time reading this one. Then I listened to The Wicked King, which is the second book in the Folk of the Air trilogy, the sequel to The Cruel Prince, on audiobook by Holly Black. And this was me trying to give this series another chance. I was kind of so-so on the first book. So sometimes in fantasy, the first book is just like setting up the world, and then the more books you get into, the better the series gets. So that's what I was hoping would be the case with this one, since I just found The Cruel Prince to be mediocre, and I know a lot of people love this series. So I was giving it another try, but I ended up giving this book 2 stars. I just don't think it's for me. I'm already not a big fantasy girly, so this book was just too politicky for me, and I didn't care about anything that was going on. I didn't care about the characters. There were like maybe 4 or 5 moments in this book that I was like, oh, okay, I'm really liking this, and thinking it was gonna go somewhere, and then it just kind of went back to like the politics of this world, and I didn't really care. And also for a YA book, I feel like this was kind of hard for me to understand. It made me feel dumb because I had to go and look up what was happening. I like found this little article that was basically like a SparkNotes summary of the entire book, and it really helped me out. I guess all the like world building, politicky, fantasy stuff went over my head at some parts. So yeah, I don't think this series is for me. Maybe I'll give the third book a try at some point in the future just to like finish it out, but not a huge fan of it. Then I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is a Japanese book translated into English, and I've seen it all over BookTube and Bookstagram, so I wanted to give it a try. I thought it would be a great little cozy fall read for November, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. I thought it was okay. I found it was a case of 2 things. 1, it was overhyped. 2, I feel like when people describe this book, they don't fully accurately describe it. So the way it's always been described to me is there's this cafe in Japan, and it's a magical cafe where you can go back in time, but you can only go back in time for as long as it takes for your coffee to get cold. And that sounds so interesting. It had me thinking like, wow, who would I go back in time and visit? What would I do? What would I see? What would I want to change? But the thing is, there's so many other stipulations and rules to going back in time in this cafe. So not only do you have the short window of time of only being able to go back for as long as it takes for your coffee to get cold, but there's all these other rules, like you can only visit someone in the past that has been to the cafe before. You have to sit in this one specific seat that is taken by someone like 99% of the time. So there's only like a short 1% chance you'll get to sit in this seat, and you can't leave the seat when you go back in time. It was just a bunch of crazy rules, and they even say in the book that there's a lot of customers who come to the cafe wanting to go back in time, and then they change their mind when they hear all the rules. And I felt the same way. I was kind of like, what's the point? There's all these rules, you know. If I can only see someone that's been to the cafe before, that's really limiting. You can't change the future, and it just felt kind of pointless. But overall, I did like the concept, and I thought it was a sweet story. I liked the characters. It's basically like 4 short stories in here, but it's a lot of like interconnected characters, and all the stories come together at the end. I don't know, I liked the setting, but I do think this one is a touch overhyped. Then I read Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. This is one I started back in July, and it took me so long, not because it was a bad book or anything, but this is one that my husband and I have been reading together. So when we choose a book to read together, it takes us a while to get through it because we usually only read like a couple chapters a week before bed or something, so we don't rush through these books at all. So this book is about a woman named Laurel whose daughter Ellie one day just up and mysteriously vanishes out of the blue. And it seems really peculiar because there's no evidence found, there's no suspects in the case, so it's like, what happened to Ellie? And Ellie's disappearance really takes a toll on the family, as you would expect. Laurel and her husband end up divorcing. Laurel's relationship with her other children is a bit strained because Ellie was kind of like the golden child of the family. But after many years pass, Laurel tries to move on with her life and pull herself together as best she can, and she ends up dating this new guy that she meets named Floyd. And Floyd has a daughter of his own named Poppy, and Poppy reminds Laurel a lot of Ellie, but she can't put her finger on exactly why. So I really liked the writing in this book. I thought it was really well written, but I don't know. I've heard a lot of people say that eventually you put the pieces together and you can kind of see where this story ends up going, but I don't know where I thought the story was going. It definitely wasn't where this story ended up taking us. It was very weird and a bit disturbing and bizarre and just really sad. I feel like throughout too, I wouldn't say it was a slow-paced book, but it was kind of like not much was happening, and I was just like ready to get to the point. So I don't know, it just wasn't super thrilling to me for a thriller. I think I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Okay, the next book I listened to on audiobook, I'm so excited to talk about this book because it blew me away, and that is The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth. So last month I listened to The Mother-in-Law by Sally Hepworth on audiobook, and that one blew me away as well. That was a thriller I see like all the time in passing kind of when I'm looking at other thrillers. and I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. So I decided to give another one of her books a listen. They're all narrated by the same person, and I really enjoyed the narration. So The Good Sister seemed to be one of her more popular books, so I decided to try that one next. And it's basically about these twins, Fern and Rose, and it alternates their POVs each chapter. And the majority of the story takes place in the present, but we do get glimpses of their past. And we see what their life was like growing up, we see what their relationship to their mother was like, and we see that Rose has always kind of stuck up for Fern and looked out for her. And I don't really think you should know too much going into this. Basically, we're just seeing Fern and Rose's relationship to each other and how some secrets from their past play out in the present. And it was just so good. It really shows you like how you don't really know people, and people can be hiding a whole bunch of things. And the thing that I loved the most about this book was Fern. I think Fern is my favorite character of 2022. I absolutely loved reading from her POV. She was hilarious. She said so many funny things that made me laugh out loud, and I just fell in love with her. She was amazing. Loved her character so much. I related to her so much. This book is technically a thriller, but I feel like the thrilling part doesn't happen until like the last third of the book, and the majority of the book I would say is more like literary fiction with an undertone of suspense. Like, you know, there's something dark underneath the surface, and then it all comes bubbling up at the end. And I don't know, it wasn't like a shocking huge reveal at the end. It was mostly just the way Sally Hepworth writes. It just really pulls me in and intrigues me, and I was so sucked into the story. I was so invested. I did not want to stop listening to it. I listened to it like any free chance I got. I just absolutely loved it. Could not recommend it enough. I feel like if you scare easily but want to try thrillers, this would be a good one for you. Or if you just enjoy a good, intriguing story that's a little bit suspenseful, you would also like this one as well. Loved the dynamic between the sisters, their relationship. So interesting. This book again blew me away, and now I'm absolutely going to be reading everything that Sally Hepworth writes. I'm also really obsessed with the show White Lotus now, and I was looking up books that are like White Lotus, and one of Sally Hepworth's books that I haven't read was on the list, so that is going to be my next read. And she has another book coming out in 2023, so she's becoming one of my new favorite authors. I'm just obsessed, and I'm so pleasantly surprised. Then I finally read an OG book talk book, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I think this book is considered fantasy, but it's kind of magical realism with a little bit of historical fiction in there. So this one is about Addie LaRue, and it starts out in like 1600s France. And Addie ends up making a deal with this night god who is essentially like the devil, and she basically wishes for more freedom, but the devil twists her words to make it so that now she is forgotten by everyone she sees. She'll walk in a room and meet someone and then walk out, and if she goes back in, they'll have no recollection of meeting her. So as you can imagine, that would make for a really difficult life to live, and she also is essentially immortal. So it starts out in the 1600s in France, and then we see her journey up until like 2000s in New York City, and it flips timelines. And I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I was rooting for Addie so hard. I was feeling like every emotion along with her when people didn't remember her and the struggle she had to go through on her journey. It just like made me so emotional. I loved her so much. Again, another favorite character of this year. Obsessed with Addie, obsessed with her story. My only critique of this book is that it's slow paced, but that didn't bother me. I just felt like in some points it dragged a little bit. I think if this book was like 50 pages shorter, it would have been a 5-star read for me. But I absolutely loved this. I felt every emotion for Addie, and I get why it's so hyped up. And the ending was so good as well. I was afraid that the ending would disappoint me, but I really loved this story so much. Okay, my camera battery light is flashing, so I'm gonna rapid fire for this last book I read. That is The Perfect Marriage by Geneva Rose. This one's about a husband whose mistress turns up dead, and his wife is a defense attorney who actually ends up being his lawyer and defending him. So it's kind of like this crazy who actually killed the mistress kind of thriller. So this thriller, for like 95% of it, I was so into the story. I felt like it was juicy. I had no clue how it was gonna end. I didn't know who the murderer was. I had all these suspicions about a bunch of different characters. So it was starting out to be a thriller that I absolutely love and just like right up my alley. I felt like it was gonna be a solid 4-star read, but the last chapter made me bump it down half a star. It wasn't even that I guessed the reveal, which I did. That didn't bother me because I thought it was a good ending. It's just the way everything was revealed in the last chapter was just too matter of fact almost. It was kind of like, oh, and remember Grandpa Joe, how he was at this part? Yeah, that's because when he went to this like, it was just so like contrived, and I just didn't like the way everything was revealed. I feel like instead of slowly dropping these reveals on us, it was kind of just like dumped in this one chapter, and like the author saved all her ideas and just like wraps it up to throw out at us in this last chapter. Alright guys, those are all the books that I read in November, so that is going to conclude today's wrap up. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you're not already, and comment below what your favorite book that you read in November was. Thank you guys again so much for watching. I'll see you so soon in my next video. Bye guys.